Wexford football experienced a golden age in the county's history between 1913 and 1918. Unprecedented and since unrepeated success was sparked when they defeated Louth in the Leinster final of 1913 with a 1-point victory thanks to a dramatic late goal from full forward James Rossiter. This was the springboard which saw them go on to win 4 All-Irelands and 6 Leinster titles in a row. But this was just the beginning of Rossiter's story.
Well, the Wexford football team of this period are the most successful GAA team in history, and certainly in the history of Wexford GAA. They enjoyed unparalleled success, and their arrival was heralded by supporters as a new dominant force within Gaelic games.
The team was trained by Ireland's most famous sportsman of the time, boxer James Rossiter, who in 1908 had fought Canadian George Burns for the world heavyweight title. Losing in just 1 minute and 28 seconds, it remains one of the shortest professional fights on record. One of the team's key players was full forward James Rossiter, who despite being one of the team's best players, never won an All-Ireland.
Unfortunately, he only played 2 years. He played in 1913 and 1914. He made 10 appearances for the county in those 2 years. He played in all the matches in 1914. They were beaten by Kerry in the 13 final. They drew with him in the 14 final, and Kerry beat him in the replay. Well, James Rossiter was playing in all of those matches. And James actually scored 8 goals and 3 points in those 10 games. So he had to be a very, very talented guy.
Rossiter would not go on to share in the further glory and success of his teammates, as his life took an altogether different course, one which was shaped by the turbulent events in Ireland and across Europe over the following year, as Rossiter, like many other members of the GAA at this time, was also a member of the volunteer movement.
After the foundation of the Irish Volunteers in November 1913, there were GAA members who rushed to join in, and some GAA members and leading GAA officials stood on the platforms of volunteer parades and supported them in every which way they could. That didn't transfer across the entire organisation, but there were hotbeds of support.
Home rule for Ireland was passed by the British government in 1914. However, it was temporarily suspended upon the outbreak of the First World War. On the 20th of September 1914, John Redmond, leader of the Home Rule Party, at a speech in Wooden Bridge, called on the volunteers to join the British and fight against the common enemy in Europe in defence of right, freedom and religion, as it would be a disgrace forever to our country otherwise.
We have to remember that the Irish Volunteers had reached their peak just as the First World War broke out. It's estimated that there were 180,000 volunteers within Ireland in September of 1914. Of these, the split was extremely unequal over the question of whether they would involve themselves fully in the war effort or stay at home throughout the conflict. The majority of the force, roughly 93%, sided with John Redmond in his call to go wherever the firing line extends.
James Rossiter answered this call and was one of over 200,000 Irishmen who enlisted in the British Army during the First World War.
The question of why Irishmen enlisted in the First World War and what motivated them to actually go to a recruitment office is a very difficult question. Certainly economic necessity is one major factor, particularly in urban centres which provided the vast bulk of recruitment in the period. Allied to this was the question of young men who wanted to bring about a sense of adventure or experience conflict within their own time. There was certainly a vogue for militarism across Europe in this period, and that's something that Ireland was certainly not immune to.
Rossiter was a member of the Volunteers GAA club in Wexford, Redmond's home county, and enlistment was particularly high there. Aged just 22, a Roman Catholic, he gave up his job as a fitter and joined the 2nd Battalion of the Irish Guards, serving as a Lance Corporal.
Work on this remains to be done, but it seems that thousands of GAA members joined the Western Front, and so great was the recruitment in certain areas that clubs were unable to field teams.
A certain amount of GAA players involved themselves in the First World War, and as a sporting body and as an athletic association within Ireland, again they were targeted for having men who were fit, of the age and able-bodied enough to serve in the British Army.
The 2nd Battalion saw their first action of the war at the Battle of Loos in France. The battle was well underway when they were deployed on the 27th of September 1915. In the first 3 days of fighting, they suffered 324 casualties, including 101 missing. However, the number of known dead is set down as no more than 25. It was typical World War I fighting, constantly under fire and making small gains. The largest British offensive mounted on the Western Front during 1915, it was a qualified success. Some territory was gained, but casualties were high on both sides. The 2nd Battalion of the Irish Guards were removed from the front line on the 21st of October to be relieved by another battalion. Ironically, on the same day, James Rossiter is listed as having succumbed to the wounds he suffered in the battle, and became one of the thousands of Irishmen who died in the First World War.
Rossiter was a famous name within the GAA, a man who was celebrated in his local area, of course, and across Wexford, but also on a national level. He was known to followers of Gaelic football all across Ireland. There was great sadness at the death of James Rossiter. Even amongst those who opposed the war effort, Sean Etchingham came out and said how distressing it was that James Rossiter had died, that he was fondly remembered for what he had done in a Wexford jersey. The subtext, of course, was that, but he was wrong to join the British Army.
It could be quite easy in a certain reading of Irish history to forget that so many Irishmen served and died in the First World War. In one reading of Irish history, this is a narrative that hasn't been so much written out as one that has been conveniently forgotten, airbrushed out of Irish history.
Well, I think arguably the Irishmen who joined the army in 1914 and up to 1918, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, were largely forgotten for decades. This, however, did not happen directly after the war. There's still pictures of Armistice Day celebrations in Dublin that run right throughout the 1920s, and so it's only towards the end of the 1920s that their role tends to be downplayed. And I think it was really only in the 1990s, with the incipient peace process in Northern Ireland and a improvement of relations, Anglo-Irish relations, that people began to devote more attention to the Irishmen who fought in the First World War, particularly Irishmen from what became the Free State and later the Republic of Ireland. And so in that sense, politics since 1914 right up to the present day has continued to shape the ways in which we commemorate and think about the First World War.